Now we start by looking at our course documentation. We will go to our Spring Framework Enterprise Development, and in here we will go all the way down, creating REST web services with Spring Framework. And in our slideshow, we already went over understanding REST services in modern context and its goal. We did an overview of the definition, the key characteristics, the development history, the advantages, our use cases, and then we also have in here the detailed functionality and how it maps to the create, read, update, and delete with the HTTP types and MIME types. Then we also have references for deep dive study. And we also looked at using Spring Web Services for REST. We have an overview, we have the MIME types, all the status code, and then we start looking at some of the examples. We have the independence from the data format and the discoverability. And once again, we have a good summary here and references for that. Now, this is where we start looking at our documentation in relation to our actual Java code. So look at our configuring REST services using Spring MVC. We will create a separate DispatcherServlet. We will segregate our web and REST controllers. We will set up a separate context configuration. We will develop a REST controller, and we will incorporate proper error handling. So here is the overview of how we map REST requests to our controller method. We define a controller class. We map the HTTP requests. We map the posts request, map the put requests, and we map the delete. Put it all together in our registration controller. Now going over to Eclipse, and before we look in detail at our segregation of our REST servlet via our actual web UI servlet, let's run our application. Run on server. So here our web UI comes up, so we'll log in. And we see there's no registrations, so we'll create a test registration. Submit, and we see that it's been created. And if we list it, we can see it. So what we'll do now to demonstrate the segregation between our web UI servlet and our REST servlet, we will bring up SOAP UI. And in SOAP UI, we've set up a REST project with all the REST endpoints. And we'll start by taking a look at the get all registrations request. See, this is the endpoint, and here is the resource. If we compare it to the web UI, we see Charity Spring registration list. Here we have services REST registration, and if we submit the request, see it comes back with the test that we've just entered. And now we go back to look at our code. We'll start with our configs and the bootstrap config, which implements the web application initializer. Now we use this because this is not a Spring Boot application. This is an old style Spring Web MVC application. We see we start at the root. We create a root context configuration class. And in the root context configuration class, we specify the message sources, titles, errors, validation. We also have our local validator factory bean, and we do object mapping, our thread pool task scheduler, our async executor, and the tasks. Back to the Bootstrap. Now here is the two that we are concentrating on. We have two servlets contexts that uses the Spring DispatcherServlet. The first one is our web UI servlet context, and we see we map off the basic root URL, and we use a servlet configuration class. Then we essentially do the same for our REST servlet. Here we actually use a REST servlet configuration class, and we see we have some marshalling implemented for XML and JSON. We have content negotiation. We go back to Bootstrap and we look at our servlet configuration class, which implements the web MVC configurer. We see all the message converters. It includes marshalers. We see our content negotiation. We see our session resolver, and this is the view resolver for our JSPs. So this is essentially how we segregate at the root level between our REST endpoints and our web endpoints so that we don't crisscross or step on each other. And then we have the servlet context configuration for our web UI, and we have the REST context configuration for our REST endpoints, as we demonstrated between creating the test, looking at it in our web UI, and then hitting the REST endpoint and getting the test that we created back. And that concludes this tutorial. I will see you in the next one.